Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are here at about 15 days away from Harvest League being released with the upcoming 3.11 patch. And we asked a question a little while ago. We know a little bit about Harvest, and what are your impressions as a community thus far based on the information that we have? For the purposes of this poll, we put 3 response options. First, I'm enthusiastic about Harvest. Second, I'm skipping Harvest. And third, I'm meh about Harvest. Thank you so much to everybody who participated on this poll. It got about 1,000 votes, so that's a wonderful turnout. So thank you to everybody who participated, and thank you to everybody who dropped us a comment. We're going to go through some of the more interesting discussion points that were brought up through your comments here in just a moment. For those of you who are new to the channel, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future upcoming video discussions about Harvest League and Path of Exile in general. And above my slightly balding forehead, there should be some timestamps that are placed for your convenience, and those are also included down below in the video description in order to allow you to jump around to different discussion points that we will be discussing today. So the first comment that we're going to focus on is from Taco Mage. Taco Mage says, I'm excited to see another league that may not be entirely dedicated to going fast and being invulnerable in order to do the content. Metamorph, Late Synthesis, and Blight have been my 3 favorite leagues in the last 2 years, even more than Delve. While Delirium and Legion have been the 2 that I found the most difficult to feel invested in. In general, I find I am way more able to enjoy leagues that don't reinforce the breakneck face slamming of content, but rather let us explore interesting complexity. Harvest seems to promise a league along those lines, so I'm cautiously optimistic. That said, I fully anticipate it being horrible at launch, like all of the above my favorites. I'm also sort of excited about the possibility of the two-handed rework, but my expectations there are tempered by previous failures to improve two-handed balance. I may see about resurrecting my Boom Boom Scion build to see if she's good again if the rework ends up looking solid. A couple of thoughts in response to Taco Mage's comment. First off, it's a great comment. It's well written. It's well thought out. These are the sorts of comments and sorts of discussions that I like to have, so this is why I'm responding to you, Taco, so thank you so much for your comment. This is a great point, particularly about the rework. So some of you may remember that a couple of leagues ago, we got a bow rework. I'm just going to let the crickets play here for just a minute. Do you guys remember the bow rework and the emerging bow meta that came out of that? Yeah. None of us remember that because the bow rework ended up killing bows, and the way how monster HP was scaled ended up killing any kind of Magic Find builds. So the bow rework ended up not being really successful for bows unless you were trying to get bows to bow down and use other weapons, in which case it was a very successful rework. So I too share your bit of tempered enthusiasm regarding the two-handed rework, Taco Mage. I see two-handers as a massive problem from a design perspective in Path of Exile. They simply don't inherently guarantee any stats that you can't acquire through other options. The opportunity cost of using two-handers is massive. It means that you're not using a quiver, it means that you're not using a shield, and it means that you're not getting the bonus of being dual wielding. Which, by the way, if you choose to dual wield, you get increased block chance, you get increased physical damage, and then you get increased attack speed. So there's like an inherent benefit simply because you're using 2 weapons on top of the stats that are already on those weapons. Using a two-hander maybe would be really good if they got a certain subset of implicits that were just inherited to two-handers and made them simply astronomically better than single-handed weapons. Or maybe they'd be better if they had another layer of affixes that pushed beyond an additional layer. So rather than just being the top tier layer for one-handers, maybe there's an entirely new top tier for two-handers that truly push their damage beyond the scale of what is achievable with a one-hander or dual wielding. The reality is that for simply using a two-hander, you are giving up too much in a game that is about focusing and getting as much stat bonuses for the item choices and the passive choices that you make. It's simply asking you to pull yourself in too many directions, and the opportunity cost is too high for the rewards that are offered. I personally am willing to go on record and say I don't think just slapping on a few passives on the passive tree is going to fix that. I think something inherently needs to be added to two-handers themselves in order for two-handers to become more attractive than either sword and board or dual wielding. Even sword and board, as it were, or one-handed wielding wands has gotten more quality of life rework over the last year when allowing shield charge to operate with wands now. For a long time, a drawback of playing wand builds was that you couldn't use shield charge which was the go-to meta speedy boy mechanism for getting around at least straight line areas of maps and content. And wands even got that. Meanwhile, you've got two-handers that can't use some skills because, well, they're just not designed to be able to do that. You've got two-handers that get out DPS'd by one-handers all over the place. And then you've got two-handers, again, giving up all sorts of opportunity cost. Gandalf writes, I'm more excited about the other changes coming along the league, like the skill item reworks and the skill tree changes. First off, thank you so much, Gandalf, for actually following and participating in our community discussion. I'm very honored that one of the wizards of Middle-earth would take the time to comment about the upcoming 3.11 Harvest League. So for those of you who answered on the poll like either meh or I'm skipping this league entirely, this is one of the brilliant aspects of Path of Exile that keeps players coming back. Not only do we get a new league, which some players might not be that excited about, but we also get a whole bunch of additional changes that get added to the game that draw us back in. Major, big-time balance changes, whether those are on the passive tree or whether those are inside skill reworks themselves. I'm very interested to see those 50 or more uniques that are getting reworked and to see how exactly those are going to play out throughout the league. A lot of the time, simply because of a shifting meta and because of the updates to the passive tree on any given major patch, the entire meta of what is valuable in a trade league shifts. In one league, something might be worth an alchemy. In another league, it might be worth an exalted. I'm very, very excited for that, particularly when it comes to playing softcore trade, to see what items used to be worth an alch and are worth an X, and maybe what items used to be worth an X and now are worth an alch. Imagination Zero says, I'm excited about what has been shown so far. I was a little surprised by the amount of meh votes. I mean, everything that was said about the league seems thought out and not complicated. Every quality of life feature for the league I thought of was already implemented or is in the process of being implemented, as said by Chris on Ziggy D's Q&A, so really good league IMO. Imagination Zero, great comment, and this is where I want to put on my tinfoil hat, as it were, just for a moment about us inside the PoE community. This is mostly a comment about myself. I'm not throwing shade at anybody else here. I'm throwing shade at myself. Is that what that's called? Is that what the millennials call it, throwing shade? Anyway, regardless of that, I'm throwing myself under the bus here. Many of us, I'm putting myself staunchly in this category, many of us just expect for there to be problems when a new league comes out. So when quality of life features are already being discussed during a hype cycle for a league, that for some players is going to be like alarm bells going off. Now, at the same time, we might say, well, if GGG didn't talk about the quality of life that's coming out and didn't talk about the problems or potential problems that they've already solved, then we would all be QQing about, well, why didn't GGG do enough testing? Oh, Iron, why is it that GGG always makes us be the beta testers and why don't they do any kind of in-house testing, right? So like on the one hand, if GGG comes out and says, hey, we've thought about these things and here's what we're doing to try to smooth those things out, they're kind of damned, because then players go, oh, that looks almost too smooth. What is it that GGG is going to screw up next? On the other hand, if they don't come out and say that, then there's a whole segment of the player community that's going to say, well, why didn't they test this further? So it'll be very interesting to see how Harvest is responded to. In my opinion, this is actually very similar to when Incursion was announced. A lot of players weren't that thrilled about Incursion. Yes, it eventually built up in hype, but a lot of players, when Incursion was initially announced, were somewhat reserved in their response to Incursion's announcement. If you want to see some of those reactions and hear some of the comments, you can go back. We've got like literally video footage of what player responses and what comments were like at that point in time. On the one hand, you might say, hey, the two leagues share in similarity that it's over the summer, but other than that, maybe there's not much overlap. Harvest is a bit muted maybe in its representation, maybe because people have been playing Delirium and have just played a ton of Path of Exile, and so maybe players aren't going to be blown away by anything at this point in time, regardless of how grandiose it is. So I think there's a lot of different factors that are at play here about why players would vote meh and how many players have voted meh. If Harvest turns out being anything like Incursion, then it will gradually grow in its hype as we get closer and closer and as the days count down. And eventually players are going to look back and go, yeah, that was a really, really great league. Nobody looks back, or very few players look back. I'm sorry if I've offended you by saying nobody. Almost no one looks back and says Incursion was my favorite league. I'm simply saying that anecdotally. I don't have any stats to back that up. I'm simply saying that based off of our conversations that we have here in G3. Most players reference other leagues other than Incursion as their favorite. However, players also don't include Incursion in their most hated leagues or in their most frustrated leagues. That's typically Synthesis or Betrayal, mostly due to quality of life issues or mostly due to confusion. Incursion is neither in the beloved category for most loved or in the hated category for most hated. In that regard, Incursion as a league is mostly meh. It's somewhere in the middle. A lot of us still use it. A lot of us loved it during Delirium League as a way to take advantage of and increase the amount of splinters that would pop out from the monster pack sizes of Alva encounters inside maps. But for the most part, it's a middle of the road league, and maybe that's what Harvest is going to be. As they say in show business, you always want to be talked about, whether or not you're being hated on or whether or not you're being praised. Either way, you're at least getting talked about. And so my true concern for Harvest, and this is one of the reasons why I included the meh option even on the poll, was because I wanted to see if players were actually in the middle of the road on this and are not going to get hyped for it. And if that's a thing, and we can compare it to other leagues that have generated similar amounts of responses or similar amounts of meh sorts of response. Paul Spillane gives us a reason for why he's a meh voter. He says he's not interested in obscure crafting. No mobs added to maps, just push the button to pick up the seeds. Not interested in running Uberlab more than once per tune, and not interested in playing slams and war cries. Brands are a league theme, and they're going the way of the dinosaur, just like the Bow League. So Paul gives us some insight into why it is that some players are going to be voting for meh. Maybe it's because, like he said, he doesn't want to run the Uberlab more than once. And so having something that essentially enchants or changes the way the Uberlab works or the rewards of the Uberlab isn't appealing to him. While some of us have been asking for two-handed reworks and for increases and boosts to melee over the course of multiple leagues, other players just aren't that interested. And if the mechanism by which melee is getting fixed is by adding slams or by adding support for slam skills and by adding support through war cries and through active gameplay mechanisms like war cries, well, then players aren't going to be that interested. We'll see how the exert mechanism comes out and whether or not that's truly going to be a benefit to two-handers or if that's just going to be co-opted and adopted by dual wielders and sword and board guys. The fact that we've already got a lot of news about the way how brands are going to work tells me, at least to some extent, that brands overall are actually moving in to take over the lifestyle or the space or the playstyle of totem users. I would really love to hear any feedback if you guys have got feedback on this. This is where I'm sitting at as I'm reading and looking at the brand discussion, the brand new discussion of what is coming in 3.11. And to me, why would I play a totem build when I can just play brands? Why would I play something that is capped, and heavily capped, mind you, by action speed or by totem placement speed, when I could simply drop brands? And those are available to be buffed via cast speed. And you can even keep them going and relatively recall them frequently through brand recall. No, we won't be able to do the same OP things that we did through Archmage Storm brands in the past, where we just kept brands up all the way through a particular map. But bummer, that means that I have to summon them 2, 4, 10, maybe even 20 times in a map. I guarantee you it's summoning less things than it would be if I was playing a totem user, where I'm basically summoning new totems every single screen and every single new pack. That's just not that interesting. If you're a totem user and you feel differently and you're like, hey, brands suck and here's why totems are better, let me know down below in the comments. But I don't think brands are going the way of the dinosaur. I think totems are going the way of the dinosaur. Just look at ballistas. That was the last big rework for totems, and boy, you can really tell players are excited to try out ballistas. So I mean, those builds are just all over the place, right? Weiku Jitsu says, after thinking on it for a day, I've decided the new crafting method equals hype. The new harvest mechanic and how it looks like we will interact with it, and not sure if I will like it. But as always, patch notes make or break the game for me. I just want to use my favorite skills to defeat endgame without abusing some meta. Please, GGG, buffs for self-cast, or at the very least, do not nerf the damage on Archmage. It's been the most fun for me ever. I love self-casting, but it suffers from not being COC or totems, etc. This is where I think Waco really hits on a split that is currently around at least the amount of information that we've got for Harvest. I think some players are very, very hype for the new patch notes that are going to come out. They're not hype for crafting because some players don't like crafting. When Bestiary came out, a ton of players hated on it, not just because of the nets, but because it was primarily a Pokemon Catch'em crafting league where you would go about crafting and building your own stuff. Now that was at a different time in the life cycle of Path of Exile. Solo Self-Found was kind of a new thing at that point, and a lot of players saw Bestiary as a new way to engage with content they've already engaged with by playing Solo Self-Found. I feel like this division in the community is very, very poignant right now. We've got some players who really want crafting. Hi, hello, I'm G3Iron. I'm one of those guys who loves crafting. I loved Synthesis League. I love Bestiary and the options that it provides for you. On the other hand, you've got other players who just want big new patch notes and new passive changes. That's totally fine as well. But these clearly are two different segments of the population. Now, you might have some players who are like, hey, I just love it all. I love everything. And I probably fall more into that category than just the crafting side of things. But nonetheless, there is an identification that there are multiple different groups of players inside Path of Exile with multiple different motivations. Some players like to craft. Some players just want to play the game and will trade to accomplish whatever goals it is that they're aiming for, and they want nothing to do with crafting. I think this is why overall, Harvest has gotten something of a meh response, or something less than a overhyped response. During Delirium, everybody who wanted to zoom and go fast could do that. That meant that everybody who wanted to craft would have the currency to craft. It meant that everybody who just wanted to buy something and play a specific build would have the currency to buy something and play that specific build. Zoom metas are going to force you into particular things if you want to accomplish certain goals, but for the most part, if you're a crafter, there was going to be options, and if you were just a player or a trader, there were options. With a league that clearly presents itself as a crafting-oriented league, this leaves out a certain segment of the population that's going, hey, what about us? We don't really care that much about crafting. So I think that's at least some of what's going on here. I might be interpreting the entire community response totally wrong, and I'm expecting you to point that out if that's the case down below in the comments. Red comments some of the sentiments that I was feeling even as I was watching as a blue man watching through the live stream of the release and all of the announcements. Like I was confused. I felt confused when Harvest was first announced. And here's some reasons why. Red puts it into words much better than I can. He says the interview, referencing the interview between Chris and Ziggy D, was confusing. It felt like they watched a different trailer than I did. Chris mentioned that a lot of the top-end crafting options were added into the presentation last minute. Honestly, nothing in the announcement gave me like a, oh snap, if I don't play this, I'm going to miss out feeling. The crafting system presented were okay, a little mediocre, definitely not competing with the latest league reward systems. We are going to break the game this league, is a quote from Chris. Please, by all means, show me where. Give me something concrete. Swapping influences and targeted annuls are cool, but game breaking? Did Chris even play Bestiary or Betrayal, I wonder? The cluster jewel thing is honestly super upsetting. You just bricked the tree and now everyone commits to cluster stacking, and you will have an absolutely crap show removing or nerfing them later. So many of you joined us for the live reveal and the live announcement of Harvest. Many of you and many of us as a community are spread out across the world. It's one of the things that I love most about the G3 community. It's one of the things that I love most about the internet is that we're all over the globe, all over different places, so we can't all gather together at the same time. But nonetheless, those of you who watched during the live stream or maybe watched the VOD, you saw it was like, wait, let's pause this trailer. Let's slow this down. Where is this OP amazing crafting coming from? Like, okay, we can change some socket colors. Okay, we can swap a stack of orbs into another stack of orbs. So essentially that's the gambler divination prophecy turn in. Like maybe there's other combinations of crafts that are going to be available that weren't shown in the trailer, but much of the stuff that was shown in the trailer didn't look like it was that powerful unless, which is the case oftentimes in grinding gear games related things, unless the wording on some of those crafts didn't actually indicate what we're thinking they indicate, but they actually indicate something different. I'll give you a concrete example of this. Imagine if you could create an item that had Shaper and Elder and Hunter and Crusader and Redeemer. Like imagine if you could create an item that had one of those stat lines from each of those special categories. Now we're talking about powerful crafting that has never been seen before in Path of Exile. That would have been an example of something concrete that says, hey, here's a chase rare item that you'll want to craft in Harvest League. Now get ready because in 14 days or so, you're going to be able to start chasing it. At the moment, I've watched through the trailer multiple times and I've paused it frame by frame and I'm like, oh, what are the skills that they're showing? What are the items that they're using? What are the crafts that they're showing? And really, it just looks like it's a bunch of stuff that's cool, but not necessarily game-breaking. For instance, in Synthesis, you could make game-breaking items, and they were so game-breaking, they've been made legacy, and we've been told essentially multiple times, hey, this ain't coming back. It's too powerful. So when Chris uses words like, hey, we're going to break the game this league, it's very, very interesting, and it's a bit confusing to say, hey, Am I watching the right trailer? Maybe, you know what? Maybe I'm missing something, and that's totally possible. Just because I've got a bunch of time in Path of Exile doesn't mean I don't miss things. Maybe I missed it, maybe you guys have found it, and maybe other people have found it already and are going, wait, that's exactly what I'm going to aim for because this is game-breaking, and this will be introduced in Harvest. I assume as a community, we're going to find out more stuff as the league comes out. Community discovery is a massive part of Grinding Gear Games development philosophy, and it's a massive part of why I enjoy Path of Exile. It's because we all discover stuff together. Or maybe we don't. Maybe we don't discover it. Maybe one person discovers it and they don't share it for multiple leagues and they just keep it to themselves as this precious little secret. That's really cool to me. That dynamic is very, very cool, and it keeps me coming back to PoE, and I assume there's going to be secrets like that within Harvest. Dingalon says, I very much like Harvest because first off, there's more stuff to do. The thing I love about PoE is that there's so much to do. Doing the same thing over and over and over again is boring for me. This is for me a new layer of things that you could do, but don't have to do. Secondly, influenceable. You have control over influence and on the outcome. Unlike in Bestiary, you can plant certain seeds for wanted outcomes. Thirdly, crafting. Even though I play Trade League, I like crafting my own gear. I rather spend the currency in crafting my own gear with the potential of greater outcomes than farm currency to then go shopping. Dingalon, this is a great perspective, and thank you so much for your comment. There is more stuff to do. For a long time in Path of Exile, players wanted more stuff to do. That's what we wanted. We wanted more of an endgame. And now there's so much stuff to do. There's Delve, there's Zana missions, there's unique maps galore. There's all kinds of different bestiary quests that you can go on. There's prophecies. There's endgame bosses galore. Like, do you want to rate yourself on endgame bosses? As soon as I bring that up, you have to say, well, which endgame bosses? For some players, endgame bossing is going to be at Ziri. For others, it's going to be the Uber Lab. For others, it's going to be Shaper. For others, it's the Elder. For others, it's the Uber Elder. For others, it's going to be all in the depths of Delve where many players have never even touched. There's tons of stuff to do, and Harvest certainly promises that there's going to be this other mini-game aspect of Path of Exile that players can interact with and hopefully are going to be able to scale their interactions, either make it amazingly delicate and intricate and complex, or make it relatively simple and approachable because that's what they would like to do. Dingalon, you make another great comparison comparing Harvest to Bestiary. In Bestiary, we were all slaves to RNG. Every single instance that you went to, you just had to hope that you were going to capture the correct beast in the correct zone that had the specific mods that you needed for a particular outcome. Now we've got control and influence on the outcome. Imagine if you had some sort of feed or some sort of lure that you could use in order to guarantee that specific monsters for bestiary recipes were available in specific zones. That's essentially what Harvest is doing. It's saying we're going to guarantee specific outcomes for your crafting because you've got the seeds to do it in your garden. Dingalon clearly falls into that category of players that we were talking about earlier in the crafting section of things. He loves to craft and would rather craft than trade. And I feel like more and more players are moving in that direction, but I also feel like that is something of a level of interest in a player and whether or not they like the crafting system of Path of Exile. I know some players who choose to play Path of Exile as an action RPG over other action RPGs because of the depth and the replayability, not because of the crafting. There are other players who I know who want to play because of the crafting, but they actually prefer the gameplay of other action RPGs. So it's very, very interesting that, again, GGG is trying to entice certain players to come and play and try out the Harvest because of the crafting mechanisms. We'll see exactly how powerful they end up being. We will see if they end up simply being something that's nice and it's nice quality of life to have, but is mostly restricted for solo self-farmers and for players that like to craft their own stuff, or if it's going to be truly powerful enough to entice players who have never before wanted to try and craft their own stuff to actually do just that, craft their own endgame gear. Well, thanks so much for watching today's discussion video. What are your thoughts on Harvest? Are you enthusiastic about Harvest? Are you skipping Harvest altogether? Are you meh about Harvest? Leave us a comment down below and let us know what your thoughts are for the upcoming June 19th release of Harvest on PC. It'll be releasing on PlayStation and Xbox the following week. If you've got any questions or comments or suggestions about future content and discussions that you'd like to see here at G3, drop us a comment down below. And I hope Harvest is the league that a Mirror of Calandra will drop for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.